Welcome back, everyone. If you're joining me today, it's probably because you want to understand our chaotic world just a little bit more clearly. Well, today, we're going to fundamentally shift how we look at societal friction, arguments, and disagreement. Instead of looking at conflict as this constant, massive modern headache, we're diving straight into a fascinating philosophical text called the Vital Dialectic, Opposition as a Catalyst for Truth. Throughout this explainer, we're going to unpack this incredible idea that opposition, well, it isn't some glitch in the human system. It's actually the very engine of our survival.
Okay, let's dive into this. Why is it so vital that we actually disagree with each other? I mean, most of us are totally conditioned to avoid conflict, right? We want harmony, we want alignment, we just want everybody to get along. But I want to ask you to completely rethink that negative bias you might have against opposition. The source text we're analyzing today argues that our natural instinct to push back against one another, it might actually be the master key to our endurance as a species.
So, Section 1. What is opposition really? Redefining disagreement. To truly wrap our heads around this, we need to kind of zoom out, way out, past our personal, day-to-day frustrations, and look at the universal history of humanity.
The text literally strips away all those negative connotations of conflict we usually hold on to. It defines opposition simply as the freedom and possibility of a distinct point of view. That's the whole shebang right there, just the presence of another angle. Historically, this natural freedom of expression was almost always viewed negatively because it acted as a direct threat to what was considered power or an imposed, unquestionable truth. But when you strip away the ego and all the politics, opposition is just the freedom for a different perspective to simply exist.
Let's move to Section 2 and see how this builds, a tool for survival, and how disagreement literally kept us alive. Let's travel way back in time. Long before social media or modern political debates, living alongside others generated a biological survival mechanism. Disagreement wasn't just, cheap talk. It was quite literally how we stayed alive.
Think about it. Early, small communities had to constantly figure out and regulate these fundamental social dualities. Self versus others, interior versus exterior, private versus public. As humans became more dependent on one another, we formed bonds. Actually, scratch that. It's more than just forming bonds. We had to actively maintain them. And how do you maintain a bond? Through adjustment. And how do you adjust? Well, through discussions, analyses, and yes, even intense arguments. Discussing our relationship to the world generated contrasting plans that regulated these exact dualities. It was through this very tension, that push and pull, that common survival plans were forged.
And this is where the survival aspect becomes brilliantly clear. The text emphasizes that having another angle of view, even a highly unpopular one, was absolutely essential. Why? Because that minority viewpoint always highlighted distinct problems or hidden threats that could literally endanger the entire group. Like if everyone agreed to go hunt down in the valley, but one opposing voice pointed out the tracks of a massive predator, well, that friction saved lives. Opposition provided a different, desperately needed form of truth about impending dangers.
Which brings us to a stark historical reality presented in the text, contrasting two very different mindsets. Communities that embraced a flexible mindset, one that actually allowed for the adjustment brought on by opposition, they adapted, and they survived. But on the flip side, communities operating with a fixed mindset, where a single, hardened direction was vehemently sustained without allowing for any angle of opposition, those groups ultimately faced destruction. Without the ability to see the collateral or distinct aspects of a problem, a rigid society just cannot adapt to a changing world. It's a total dead end.
Section 3. The microclimate of life, or the everyday presence of the other. Now, opposition isn't just for ancient tribes or historical empires, it's the everyday biological and existential presence of what the text calls the other. It's right here in our daily lives.
And this brilliantly illustrates how deeply ingrained this whole concept is in us. Opposition naturally manifests across an entire human lifespan. From the moment we're born, we experience opposition to our caregivers as we cry out and assert our needs. In childhood, it pops up during play as we're figuring out boundaries. In school, we push back against learning systems and authority. And then in adulthood, it's right there at work and in our reactions to societal trends. These aren't just rebellious phases. It's the continuous presence of the other allowing us to develop. It proves that opposition is the actual mechanism by which our personal microclimates develop and maintain meaningful bonds.
Section 4. The autoimmune disease of power, when disagreement is crushed. So, what actually happens when that natural healthy mechanism is suppressed? Well, this introduces the overarching antagonist of the text, power. Power operates at the mass social level, and it has this intense, almost gravitational tendency to preserve and propagate itself.
almost always to the severe detriment of opposition.
The source outlines exactly how power systematically tries to silence disagreement. First, it sets the overarching trends and directions, basically deciding what is acceptable. Second, it creates these massive systems of control and dissemination to enforce that specific direction. And finally, its ultimate goal is to make opposition completely impossible. It actively tries to eliminate multiple visions and crush any other angle of view in favor of its own dominant narrative.
Here, the text uses an incredibly evocative biological metaphor. It says that when power successfully crushes the possibility of the other being able to speak or even exist, it doesn't just harm the oppressed, it erodes it from within as well. It becomes an autoimmune disease of power. By destroying the exact mechanism of opposition that allows a society to adapt and survive, power effectively attacks its own social body. It literally destroys itself from the inside out.
The text explains that this destructive cycle stems from what it calls a godlike positioning. This is basically the false, super-arrogant belief that a system or a group holds an ultimate, unquestionable truth. But the reality laid out by the author is honestly quite humbling. Human beings never hold an ultimate truth. Never, regardless of the system they find themselves in. Acting as though we do completely ignores human reality and cuts us off from the vital adaptations we need to just keep going.
Section 5. The Path to Truth. The Dynamic Turmoil of Adjustment. So if nobody holds the ultimate truth and power destroys itself by pretending it does, then what is the actual path forward? This reveals the ultimate payoff of why embracing the other is so utterly essential for society's journey. So the crucial point here is that we essentially have two very different views of truth. On one side, you've got fixed and imposed truth. That's the illusion of that godlike positioning that ultimately crushes opposition and causes the autoimmune destruction we talked about. But on the other side, we see reality, constructed and discovered truth. Truth is not something just handed down from on high. It's something that is constantly questioned, sought out, constructed, and discovered through disagreement. Opposition leaves the search free. It fully embraces the dynamic turmoil of continuous adjustment. That turmoil isn't a glitch. It isn't a problem. It is the process.
Which leaves us with this final, really important question to consider. How will you embrace the dynamic turmoil of opposition in your own life? The next time you face a super frustrating disagreement, whether that's at work, at home, or just out in society, I want to challenge you to look past the annoyance. Remember that the presence of that differing viewpoint is the biological and philosophical pulse of our survival. It is the very catalyst that forces us to adapt, to connect, and ultimately to discover the truth together. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.